Hello, my name is Tony Hill, and today I will be presenting a case analysis for Lange versus the National Biscuit Company. The origin of this case concerns the incident that occurred on May 1st, 1969. The case was then trialed under the Supreme Court of Minnesota to determine if the defendant, the National Biscuit Company, should be held accountable under the Respondent Superior Law, which is a legal doctrine that holds an employer responsible for their employees' actions, and if the defendant's employee operated within the scope of employment. The entities involved in this case included Mr. Jerome Lange, who was the manager of a small grocery store in Minnesota which stocked and sold Nabisco brand goods. The defendant, Nabisco, has been known as one of the largest American manufacturers of cookies, crackers, and other snacks since 1898. Founded in Chicago, Illinois, Nabisco quickly became a household favorite as the company grew from merging with some of the largest retail brands, such as the Shredded Wheat Company and Kraft. Ronald Lynch, who was found to be the aggressor, was hired by Nabisco as a cookie salesman trainee in 1968. Mr. Lynch's day-to-day responsibilities included sales and marketing tasks, such as making sales calls, taking consumer orders, as well as ensuring that merchandise was fully stocked on store shelves. The chain of events that led to the lawsuit being filed against Nabisco advertently involved the plaintiff, Mr. Lange, and Mr. Lynch between March 1st to May 1st, 1969. During this time, there were several complaints made against Mr. Lynch that pertained to his demeanor, his attitude, as well as professionalism. On the day of the incident, May 1st, 1969, Mr. Lynch was at Mr. Lange's store to arrange store shelving with previously delivered Nabisco merchandise. It was then where Mr. Lange approached Mr. Lynch to discuss his work performance. In response, Mr. Lynch became very upset and angry and began swearing at Mr. Lange in front of store patrons. Mr. Lange then asked Mr. Lynch to refrain from yelling and swearing, especially seeing that children were present, or else he would be asked to leave the store. Becoming seemingly more irate, Mr. Lynch then threatens Mr. Lange and dares him to fight. When Mr. Lange refuses to fight, Mr. Lynch proceeds to brutally attack Mr. Lange and destroy property by throwing merchandise around the store before leaving the scene. Now, before moving along, there are a couple critical factors to recognize and acknowledge due to their impact in the ruling and court's decision. For starters, and considerably the most prevalent, is the several complaints Nabisco received towards Mr. Lynch's demeanor and attitude from the store manager as well as store shoppees. This notion serves to be a critical factor because Nabisco was given substantial amount of fair warning to mediate the setback as well as assert ramifications. Secondly, and to add to the previous point, was the history or negative undertone between Mr. Lange and Mr. Lynch. However, and needless to say, there was evidence presented during this trial that revealed this opposition did in fact go overlooked for months, which potentially could have stimulated the assault as a result of built up and unresolved animosity. And lastly, to piggyback off the previous factors, Nabisco's negligence in hiring and training process can be seen shadowing Mr. Lynch's work performance and professionalism even prior to the assault, when Mr. Lynch is noted for taking the shelf space that was knowingly set to be reserved for competitor companies and arranging Nabisco merchandise in its place instead. Being trialed for imposed liability under the Respondent Superior Law, the district court of Minnesota ruling in the Lange versus the National Biscuit Company set out two parts for determining whether the employee's assault is within the scope of employment. The first part is whether the assault was motivated by business or personal consideration. And the second part is whether the employer acted within contemplated incident of assault. Concerning the first part of the determinant, the court concluded that the assault was motivated by business considerations with reasoning that intent was implied due to the employee's outlined work-related duties and responsibilities. With this predication, the plaintiff, Mr. Lange, was awarded damages on the grounds of Mr. Lynch committing the crime during work-related time frame and place to further operational advancement for his employer. Therefore, was acting within the scope of employment. This ruling warranted the defendant, Nabisco, to file a motion with the Minnesota Court of Appeals for judgment notwithstanding the verdict. In 1973, Nabisco was granted this motion, and the trial ruling decision was overturned on the grounds of lack of significant evidence that lamented to Mr. Lynch acting within the scope of employment during the time of the assault. To appeal this decision, Mr. Lange filed a motion arguing against the ruling that negligence was asserted in the hiring and or retention of the employee. It was then heavily weighed under the Supreme Court of Minnesota, the relationship between the employer and the employee, as well as the respondent's superior liability factor, to determine that the employer, Nabisco, was liable for the assault by the employee since the source of the attack related to the workplace obligations, and including that the assault occurred within work-related time limits and place, therefore awarding Mr. Lange damages for injuries sustained. In conclusion, this case significantly shaped the justice system as it helped establish the principle of the respondent's superior law, which holds an employer liable for the actions of his or her employees, even if the employer is not directly involved. The court's decision in Lange versus the National Biscuit Company imposed liability on an employer for an assault by an employee when the source of the attack relates to an employee's responsibilities and or occurs within work-related time or place. This case also helps warrant a legal safeguard for stakeholders within the economic venture by ensuring employers are held accountable for their employees' bearings by drawing importance to ethical decision-making, liability, and avid management of affairs. This does conclude my presentation. I thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.